Hello, community, and welcome back. I'm Dr. Nita, founder and CEO of Dr. Nita Enterprises, where I work with leaders and teams to help navigate complexity and change by raising awareness about how diversity, inclusion, and belonging reinforces workforce sustainability. We've been having an amazing dialogue with Mr. Leo Botteri. He is the founder of Peer Innovation, which is a peer advisory group working with the C suite. And we have been talking about all things related to the C suite and their perspective. In our last conversation, we ended on what some may see as a little bit of hypocrisy in the C suite level, and I want to unpack that a little bit. Recently, I attended a wonderful conference in Dallas, Texas with YPO, and I had the pleasure of listening to all of these wonderful CEOs talk about the challenge they have in balancing keeping the business on track with integrating and incorporating diversity, inclusion, belonging. So I want us to talk about that a little bit more. I know that throughout different levels of the organizational system of systems, it may appear to some that the CEO and the C-suite just isn't doing enough to be more serious about diversity, inclusion, belonging. But when we think about the challenges that the C-suite has in terms of just keeping the business operating, we've got supply chain issues, we've got hiring issues, let alone where do we find these people? Things may not always appear as though they really are not doing what they should be doing to our level of expectation. So Leo, let's unpack that. What are your thoughts about how sincere the C-suite is being in face of the challenges that they have?
So first of all, I don't think those ideas are mutually exclusive, number one. But secondly, I think to be fair about it, change never happens as quickly as everyone would like it. What's usually interesting, though, is when you look back and you're thinking, wow, over the last 5 years, things have changed a lot. But when we're in it, we're in the moment, we don't always feel that change, and we can, that tension can kind of happen. I think what you want, though, is an organization where people accept responsibility for being a contributor no matter where they are. Part of what peer innovation is all about is the power of we begins with me. The power of we begins with each of us. So it's not enough to go up in the cheap seats and sit and talk about how this isn't happening and that isn't happening and point fingers. I think the real question is, what do I do about it? What can our team do about it? How can we make a contribution, a positive contribution to the dialogue that helps us meet the challenges that we're facing as an organization, and by the same token, advance ourselves in so many other ways. So I just think that if you want to roll up your sleeves and get in and get involved, do it. And I think that's where, if most people did that, I think you'd have a lot of this change. And I think the issue too is, to be clear, is not having it happen so much as fast, but have it happen in a way that's sustained. I love the podcast you did, as I mentioned to you, about this idea of woke and awakening, and a real credible difference there in terms of how people come to, and we also, it's funny because we had a lovely talk at the end of last week, and even just talking about Kurt Lewin, right? This whole unfreezing and change and refreezing. I mean, here's something that's from the 1940s, and yet, is relevant today when it comes to how we have to unfreeze, we have to unlearn certain things. And then maybe there's change, and hopefully there's change, and then we relearn that, and it becomes so much of an essential part of how we do things, but it just doesn't happen overnight as much as we would like it to, as much as it would be wonderful if it did, to make the change really sticky and to make it something that is truly part of a renewed belief system that people have. That to me is really where it's at. So it's kind of how I think about that at the moment.
You have said a lot of things that lead me to bring up a new concept that I'm working on called leading by unpacking, and the importance of leaders role modeling that. What I mean by leading by unpacking is leading by openly unpacking, as you said, outdated ways of thinking about people, being with people, showing up, how we're approaching the workforce, right? But unpacking that in front of others to say, this has been my take previously, but now I see things differently and I'm shifting over here. And too often, I think we don't allow people the space to do that. We expect people to be perfect from day one. And we really need to allow people the space to lead by unpacking old stuff so that they can get to a new place. What do you think about that in terms of the freezing and the unfreezing and the refreezing?
I think it goes right back to what we talked about before about really making that intentional effort to get to know one another as fellow human beings and make that truly human connection versus just, you know, getting to know one another as fellow coworkers. I mean, it's just a night and day difference. When we really start tapping into the challenges that people have, the places they've been, their kids, their families, their, you know, where they grew up, what are the kinds of things that shaped who they are. I'm not sure if we had chatted about this before, but I think just having a base level of curiosity is so critical. It's so important. And think about the fact that certainly when I grew up in my generation, what was the advice kids were given? Don't talk to, in any social situation, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. Okay. Now, I get a little bit of the what was going on there in terms of a lot of agendas, you know, working outside of that conversation. But the reality is that it set people up that these topics are fodder for a fight or a debate or who's right and who's wrong and all of that versus imagine having a situation where people really, hey, someone's a Republican, someone's a Democrat. Tell me how that came about for you and how kind of you see the role of government or, you know, and just finding out, you know, what people believe or asking someone about the role of faith in their life and what does that look like for them. And, you know, to have those kinds of open, curious conversations, you start to very quickly get to the fact that all everyone wants, by and large, I think, is a lot of really good things. They may have some different ways of going about it. They may have some different influences that shape how they see certain things. But the greater understanding we have of that, the better. And the more that we're able to do more of that. But I think, and we haven't taken, you know, great steps, you know, in that regard, obviously, in recent years. I think it's been difficult for people to have those kinds of conversations because they turn them into debates and they become, because we know that it's influenced very highly by the fact that we can select which news we watch and if it aligns with our worldview, and we get all of this confirmation bias that tends to come into play. And again, we have to change what we're reading, what we're watching, who we're looking at, who we're talking to. And if we're ever going to broaden our view, we have to make an effort to do that. And that starts with each and every one of us. Leaders, for sure. Model the way, show people how to make that happen, show people the benefit to you as an individual and to all of us by making that happen. But it's got to happen. We have got to just start being more open and being more curious and less, you know, about being right. Being right is highly overrated, you know?
Yes. I agree with you 100%. As a matter of fact, I've gotten to the point of asking people in my workshops, when we're having these different conversations, you need to think about your goal. Is your goal to be right, or is your goal to have your message received? I'm going to say that again. When you're having these conversations, is your goal to be right, or is your goal to have your message received? And to that point, I always lead with, it's not my job to help you all reach agreement, but it's my opportunity to raise your awareness. And through the process of having your awareness raised, we might find out that we have reached agreement in some things. In the same way that I don't focus on discussing race relations, I discuss real relationships. And it may be naive, but I'm a firm believer that once we have established some real relationships, over time, race relations will take care of itself. That's not to say that we don't need to still have those challenging, complex conversations. But these things start on a one-on-one basis. And so you're absolutely speaking my language. How do we help leaders get there?
Well, what was really interesting was maybe showing some of the hard evidence. What was really interesting was Grammarly and the Harris poll just came out with a survey that basically said that ineffective communication is costing U.S. companies $1.2 trillion annually. So if that doesn't blow your hair back, right? So maybe, you know, and see the difficulty of this, of course, is when you ask, whether it's business leaders or knowledge workers, how are your communication skills? I think the numbers were high. They were like in the 80s. So now you're thinking, all right, well, where's the disconnect here? Because clearly this is why this is going to be a hard problem to solve, because no one believes it's them. Oh
Right.
yeah,
It's
ineffective. Oh,
everybody
it's got
else.
to be those other people, all those bad communicators out there. It's no. We all need to look in the mirror. And why? And it speaks to this point I think that you were heading to as well, is that when we think about being a leader and a leader communicator, effective receipt of the message as intended is 100% up to me. Right? I don't care if it's passing the baton on a track in a relay race, where the person passing the baton is told, you do not let go of that baton until you know it is firmly in the grasp of the recipient. When a nurse is passing a scalpel to a physician in surgery, when a general gives an order on the battlefield and that order is misinterpreted, it's the general who is relieved of command, not the soldier. And I think once we can't blame everybody else all the time. We can't say, oh yeah, that message was right there in paragraph 8 in the small print. It's like, you don't get to do that. You as a leader have to accept true responsibility for making sure that people are communicating clearly and effectively. Again, if you believe, Harris Grammarly, it's costing us not only 1.2 trillion, but it costs us even larger, I believe, with everything we've been talking about today in terms of really trying to build the kind of relationships, the kind of diverse relationships in our companies and our communities today that we've got a long way to go.
Well, especially when you talk about the cost of bringing someone into the organization, training them, going through orientation, and then they don't last. Now you're talking about remarketing and retraining and rehiring and all the costs that go along with that. And you do that over time, that wreaks havoc on your workforce sustainability and your bottom line, to be quite honest. Throughout our conversation, you keep bringing me back down memory lane when you're talking about track. And in school, I used to run on a relay, and one of my favorites was the relay race. And that goes to managing, as the leaders, our intent with our impact. My intent may have been to hand it off to you, but unless I have firmly established that you have it and will run with it, and I let go softly, the impact is nothing but a fumble, and we risk losing the race. So we need to.
I made that mistake. Well. That's why I know this so well. I did that, and to this day, it haunts me. And by the way, I was also in the marching band. So the more we talk, see, what's very good about this conversation, think about all these amazing things we have in common, right? And this is what happens, I think, when people, connect in general. It's like, wow, you did that, and they share all of these amazing experiences. So it's great stuff.
Absolutely. And that is the basis of contact theory, getting people together and letting them talk. Nudge theory, just raising awareness about things 1%, and then Gestalt theory, dealing with the ambiguity and wondering, where is this going to go? And those are the 3 theories that I always interweave into my practice, no matter who I'm talking to. So, this has just been so good. I can't believe we only have 1 session left, but I'm going to save the best for last. Community, I really hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. If you have enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to hear it again, please go to my website, www.drnita.com. And on the landing page in the top center, there's a button that says Keep It a Real Podcast. You can listen to this again or any previous podcast that I have available. Please remember to subscribe, like, and give me feedback. I want to develop and create and present content that's going to be most helpful for you. Please join me next time when we wrap up this month's conversation with Leo Botteri. He is the founder and CEO of Pure Innovation. And until next time, remember to stay blessed and keep it real.